Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Mariana Kistler Beach Museum of Art. My name is Eileen June Wang. I am a curator here at the museum, and we are standing in the gallery with the Gordon Parks Homeward to the Prairie I Come exhibition, which I co-curated with Sarah Price, our collections manager. And we have a very exciting program today. We will be talking about technical aspects of Gordon Parks photography with some renowned professional photographers. Before we get into the program, I just want to remind everyone that closed captioning is available for those who are live streaming. And you click on the CC icon either at the bottom of or the top right corner of your screen. And many thanks to our closed captioner for her work this evening. Before we begin, I acknowledge that K-State, as the first land grant institution established under the 1862 Morrill Act, is historically home to many Native nations, including the Kaw, Osage, and Pawnee. Furthermore, Kansas is the current home to 4 federally recognized Native nations: the Prairie Band Potawatomi, the Kickapoo Tribe of Kansas, the Iowa Tribe of Kansas and Nebraska, and the Sac and Fox Nation of Missouri in Kansas and Nebraska. Many Native nations utilize the Western Plains of Kansas as their hunting grounds, and others, such as the Delaware, were moved through this region during Indian removal efforts to make way for white settlers. It's important to acknowledge this, since the land that serves as the foundation for this institution was and still is stolen land. We remember these truths because K-State's status as a land grant institution is a story that exists within ongoing settler colonialism and rests on the dispossession of indigenous peoples and nations from their lands. These truths are often invisible to many. The recognition that K-State's history begins and continues through indigenous contacts is essential. Now, I'd like to introduce our speakers. First, we have Jim Richardson. He is a National Geographic photographer, and he has done over 30 stories for National Geographic, and he's also a contributing editor to its sister magazine, The Traveler. Is that right? Traveler magazine, that's right. His current focus is on issues of the environment as they are connected to food and agriculture, and many of those works are regularly featured in National Geographic's coverage of world food. Jim co-founded Eyes on Earth, an educational organization dedicated to advancing environmental photography and providing resources and tools to photographers working in this field. Jim will walk through the Gordon Parks exhibition and stop at certain photographs to discuss Parks's photo techniques and compare that to contemporary photographic practices today. Now, in that conversation, we have 3 professional photographers with us. First, on my left is Professor Shri Joglekar. He is Associate Professor of Photography here at K-State's Department of Art. And Shri has exhibited nationally, but his works will be in an upcoming exhibition of Asian American contemporary art at the Nelson Atkins Museum in Kansas City later this fall. Next to Shri is Doug Barrett, who is a photojournalist who has been featured in Time Magazine and also on BBC News. And his solo exhibition is on view right now through May 28th here at the Beach Museum of Art. So please come and check that out. His show is actually the partner exhibition to this Gordon Parks exhibition. And Doug is based in Manhattan, and he runs the photo and video company 400 North Creative. Next to Doug is Luke Townsend. He is also a professional photographer based here in Manhattan. And he is a photojournalist whose works are in the permanent collection of the Beach Museum of Art. And 2 of his works are on display in our permanent collection galleries. So come check that out if you haven't already. And he is represented by Zuma Press. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you, Eileen.
Okay, now I will cede the floor to you, Jim.
Thank you.
Take it away.
Oh, it's wonderful to be here. And amazing that we've got this great collection of Gordon Parks' work. Thanks to your work, thanks to everyone here at the Beach Museum making this happen. Thanks to Gordon Parks, of course. But it just is a great collection, and it was spurred me on to a certain idea I had about something we could do that I thought might make an interesting evening. Okay, all right. So I called up Linda Duke, right, and I said, you know, I think we could do something interesting because Gordon Parks, we know the story very well of his work on social justice, on racism, of Black identity, those kind of things. Those kind of things have been talked about quite a bit. I could offer another perspective, and it is that Parks also was a consummate craftsman. He was really good. He could go out and take virtually any assignment handed to him and make imagery out of it. And that gets great respect from professionals like us who have had to do just those kind of things. But I think that people don't, the dominant image comes from the work of the era with social justice. But I think we are doing a disservice to Parks if we don't also recognize that he mastered the skills. He mastered the skills to make all these kinds of images happen. And he was very much part of an era and an ethos there in the 60s, particularly when I began to know him, because I was just emerging into newspaper photography work. I started my senior year at K-State here, working for the K-State Collegian and learning all those kind of things. But I was really a psychology major. So some of the things I'm going to talk tonight about are really more about psychology. So with that in mind, I said, you know, to Linda, I said, you know, I'm a living dinosaur. You know, I'm a living dinosaur. I'm like one of those fish that everybody thinks are 200 million years extinct. And then some fisherman off the coast of Ireland dredges one up in their net, you know, and oh, here they are still alive. Well, I'm still alive. And I am one of those people who was alive when Parks was doing these. I was inspired by Parks as well as his colleagues at Life magazine, you know, and very much was weaned on the ideas of how you make black and white pictures, and specifically the techniques of how you make black and white pictures that transcend being representations of moments or representations of facts, and you transform them into being iconic statements of truth. And that's a very big transition. And the tools that you use, particularly in black and white, which we can talk about in depth here tonight, are very specific. They are specific to the era. They are less current now. Not only do many of our viewers here tonight probably haven't done work in a darkroom, don't know the kind of things that you can do in a darkroom, you know. And also, but we are so removed, what is it, 60 years now from when I'm talking, I'm showing my age, of Life magazine. Life magazine being the dominant weekly cultural connection for many people with the world, and what kind of things you would do to make an image for Life magazine. And so we can talk about several of those things as we go along, but Doug was good enough to bring along here as a great example, Gordon Parks's first book, okay? flash photography.
Mhm.
Flash bulbs, we mean. We don't mean strobes, we mean flash bulbs. And flash bulbs with its own special set of skills. And if you were a photographer of the era who could really do flash photography, it meant you could take on certain kind of assignments and make them work that other photographers couldn't. Just those guys out there randying around with their 35mm lens on their Leica, you know, nah, okay. Here was a guy who could use medium format and 4x5 and flash, and you would get into here. And so he's got this book, and it is a technical how-to book. You know, I was just noticing before we started, here's this page that is all about the flash bulbs available at the time. There you go. The technology of how they worked, all that kind of stuff. And then you get back in here to all these picture examples that he uses, you know, and then you get back in here to the good stuff that I really want to read, you know, and where he's talking about three or more flashes, you know, and he's giving diagrams of how you do all that kind of stuff. You know, it's very much it's a how-to book.
Very technical.
Oh yeah, and he knew that stuff.
Yeah.
And here, this last section is about portraiture. And when we get to the end of the our little tour tonight, we're going to have a very good portrait over there to use as an example of that. Okay. So as we think about those kind of things, I've also brought along a few prints here of things that might be instructional to people who don't really know how those particular kinds of things work. And what I'm hoping for, that with all of us here, this is an exploration tonight of ideas, hopefully not just a lecture, but an exploration of ideas and how we make pictures and how photographers think about things, as opposed to, I think, the way many people think of photography today. They think of photography very often as a perfect Xerox machine of the world. You know, it makes a photograph is a copy of the world. And yet, you know, this idea that there should be such a thing as a straight print, in other words, a photograph that's an exact copy. Every photograph requires a number of decisions along the way. It always requires decision-making on the part of the photographer. All of those decisions have big impact on the way the pictures look and work. And that's kind of what we want to explore tonight. So,
well, should we look at a Gordon Parks photograph? And
let's go look at a couple of them here. I'm going to step right over here, guys. Okay. We're going to start here with the minister in the pulpit. Okay. Because this is one of the first principles for me, and it is the principle of contrast. Now, I took the psychology of art from Roy Langford here at Kansas State University, and he was wonderful because he got into all of that kind of stuff. And when we say contrast here, the basic psychological business going on in people's heads when they look at things and how they can distinguish them is very often contrast. Edges, contrast, black shapes against a white background in that case, okay? And so you can see him, because Parks has been very careful to get down low and make sure that the background is clean and he doesn't have anything poking up in here, you know. There's nothing in that picture that isn't about the hands and the arms, and you've got that really strong contrast, light and dark, got an iconic shape, but then you've also got something else going on, which I want you to notice here, and we're going to talk about this a lot more, and when we get to another picture down here, you notice the edges over there are darker. That's just not because the room happened to be darker over there at the moment, you know. That's because of the way that picture was printed. And when whoever was printing this picture, whether it was from Parks's directions or whatever, the effect of darkening down the edge is to make the center look lighter, right? And with the center looking lighter, then you really emphasize him. So what you're doing here in this photograph is trying to change these tones around to emphasize where you want the viewer to look. Now we can go on to one more image right down here, right away. I'm going to set these down here for a second.
While we walk down here,
Yeah.
I can confirm that Parks paid very close attention to tones.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when he was having these photographs printed, he had very specific instructions to the person who is his liaison at the photo lab about exactly how they should
How
be
to do
printed.
it.
Yeah.
What they wanted it to look like. And if you did it for very long, what I can tell you is that if you worked with the same people for a while, people back in the dark room at Time Life Labs, they would know how Parks wanted his pictures to look. And as long as they were printable on the pages of Life magazine. Now, many of these prints here, and we'll talk about this in a minute, are too dark to print in Life magazine. They look great on the gallery wall, but they're pretty dark for halftone reproduction. The next picture I want to get to, though, here is one step beyond that picture. Is this picture, the woman being baptized there and all these people back in the background around there. And you notice how your eye really goes straight to her. And this is no longer just, it's not just a picture of her baptism. This is about community. This is about tradition, to me, at least, about faith communities, and all of that carrying through the experience. Now, let's talk, though. So this picture is essentially the opposite of that picture. Most of Gordon Parks' pictures that we're going to look at tonight are that opposite. And that opposite is, think about a picture being essentially all black, like, with light highlights. Light highlights, and you want the people to look at the light highlights. They will naturally do that. If you have that's just psychovisual stuff. If it's all black, the eye will go to the light areas, and that's exactly what's been done here.
Do you mean to say that he lightened intentionally certain parts of that photograph?
Darkened a lot of stuff.
Oh, darkened a lot, okay.
What you could do is probably print it so that she is about like this, and then there's been a whole lot of darkening going on, okay? See all these people back up there? Probably not those folks, but those people back there particularly has been darkened down. And we'll talk about over here in a second about how you do that in the dark room. But particularly these folks up here, you want to be able to see them. You want to see them back there, but you don't want them to be major actors on the stage of this little visual drama. You want them still there playing a supporting role. You have the shapes of these two guys here, and then couched in all that, you have her. Now, you can start to notice this stuff because you notice that this area right here is a little bit lighter than this area here. That's been darkened down. So basically what you're doing is you are printing this picture so that you tone down everything that you want to make a lesser item in your picture. You tone it down in the dark room. And as he's shooting these pictures, he's anticipating what he's going to do that. In this case, I've noticed on the original negative, there's a white area over here, just outside that gray area of that pillar. They cropped it out. That was the easy way to get rid of a light area that was too light and would have drawn attention, right? Okay. Then the next thing, though, is probably her face was lightened a little bit. And there's a way to take little lines here in her robe. The highlights were lightened with a process using a chemical called potassium ferricyanide to lighten just particular little areas in the picture. And it got that silvery look to the cloth. It's a master printer pulling all of this off. But essentially, think about that as essentially a dark picture with the highlights that Parks wants you to pay attention to. And he's doing that specifically because he wants the drama, all right? He wants the effect of that this is something greater than just a moment. This stands for something eternal and is part of the culture and all of those kind of things.
Well, he's thinking about composition, you know, and with the highlighting or darkening, bringing attention to those elements that he wants to be the main aspects of the story he's telling.
And so you can, so you have a couple of tools. Either you can, if you don't want people to look at things, you leave them out of the picture. That's the first tool you use. And the second thing is then you print in the black and white darkroom in order to get all those kind of effects.
Yeah.
So let's go down here, and you guys, you've done some printing. We're going to go back around here because we've got an enlarger, okay? And
thanks to Professor Joglekar,
who brought us an enlarger to use tonight. And not necessarily everybody will have seen an enlarger, but for instance, here is a photograph by Parks. Can I bring that to you a little bit? Okay, by Parks. And he has given some directions here to his darkroom printer, the cropping that he wants done on it. And you see what he's saying? Print dark, print dark. He wants those areas darkened down, right? So how does that happen? That's one of the interesting things about it. And that's what I want us to be able to look at an enlarger right here. So and this is a little dim, so I'm not going to put a negative in there, but basically what you do, of course, in a dark room is you put a negative in the enlarger. Down here, you put a piece of printing paper, all right? You expose it for, let us say, 10 seconds. That's a nice even number that you can manage, okay? 10 seconds. And the longer the exposure, the darker it gets. The more light you pour onto it, right? Yeah, the darker it gets. So we have two ways of making areas of a picture darker. Like the people in that picture down there up above, okay? What you can do is you can give the whole piece of paper 10 seconds, and then you come in here and you give the paper another exposure of another 10 seconds, say. You put your hand down there and you see that this area is covered up. That area is getting exposure. So that area, that picture back there, where the upper area is dark, probably somebody back there during the exposure doing that.
You're literally using your hand.
Nice sharp edge. Say what?
You're literally using your hand.
You're literally using your hand. Now you can do this if you want. I never like to do that because I got a straight edge. I like to be able to do this. See there, I can get a kind of a rounded shape. Or, so you can do that. Or you can take your hand like this, both hands, and now, I'm hoping you guys can see that on screen. I can light up just certain areas. And I'm going to show you some pictures down here where that's going on. So if I had a light area over in that corner there, I could give that another exposure of another 10 seconds. Go over here, give that another exposure of 10 seconds. Now, there's a cultural thing here. Oh, let's go one other thing. That's burning. That's called burning when you darken something down, okay? During your that first exposure, you can also use a little tool like this. Now, Shree bought a better one. I made this one out of some copper wire today. It doesn't matter, whatever it is, you know. So what you can do is if you have, remember her face I said was a little lighter? I think what somebody did was during that first exposure, for about 3 or 4 seconds, they went in here and they cast a little shadow over her face and then moved it out like that. So that her face came out just a little bit lighter. Now, so what you have to do, you have to be careful. If you hold this very still like this, then you get a sharp edge around there and everybody can see what you did. And you don't want that, all right? So you move that around a little bit while you're at it. And if you have a very thick wire here, you see, you're also going to get a little line there It's kind of light. So probably what you do is you go around here like this, a little bit like that, you know. My wire's a little too jiggly, like that. And don't do it too much. Then you go do all your burning and all that kind of stuff. Put it in the developer. See if you did it right. Anybody done this and not have it come out right, Shree?
I typically associate, like going off of Ansel Adams, for example, when I was learning for the first time, I had to associate at least 1 hour to doing testing before even one print was made successfully. And so it's a very arduous process. But I think the interesting thing for me in this trial and error is that the kind of understanding you develop about light is indispensable that I've never been able to gain looking at a computer screen, doing dodging and burning digitally, because this is actual light reflecting or exposing actual light sensitive material.
Exactly. And of course, you remember, you're doing this in the dark. You're doing this in the dark. And if you get it wrong, then you start over. So remember here, you did 10 seconds and then you started doing all this burning, and probably you could do multiple exposures of burning to get various areas toned down just like you want. We're going to see some real masters of this down here. Toned down so it's coming out just the way you want it. Then you stick it in the developer and you go, nuts, I missed that spot over there. And then you go back and do it again. So this is why somebody like W. Gene Smith could work for 3 days on a print. It's a master print when it gets done, but until then. So
I have a question for Professor Joglekar. So is this something that you teach your students? What is the current state of contemporary photography when it comes to this?
So in terms of teaching, I think because of convenience and also because of other forces, market forces, you can say, that most of the entry-level teaching in photography now happens digitally, at least in the US. But I have been teaching long enough that I remember teaching the entry-level class in darkroom. But typically that sequence has since flipped, where typically students learn at the college level photography digitally as their first class, and then they graduate into working in the darkroom. But in most schools, even today, all of that, what we have seen here, is practiced by undergraduate students. And I'm happy to sort of have available materials, chemicals, photo paper, photo film that still can be used just the way people used 60 years ago.
I want to get the perspective of our 2 other contemporary photographers here. So Luke, I'll go with you first, and then Doug, can you comment on how you consider or deal with this kind of technique that Gordon Parks use? I mean, do you not do it, or what's your practice?
Well, so I think there's a lot of things that merge between the techniques in the darkroom and what you can do digitally. But what I'm continuously impressed with is just how much calculation is here. Like I remember looking at like work prints from Avedon, and there'll be a circle. I want this 10% brighter, 25% darker, and it was all seemed very calculated. And now we kind of just, I think, go very visually. I'll just brush this in over here or do this, but I think fundamentally the technique or the aspects of what we're doing kind of merge, or if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think from the representation standpoint, it's kind of important to see that during the time that Gordon Parks made some of these images, like the baptism from the modern Shouting Baptist, how he printed that image was important to show what he was trying to show of the people, which was important. So I think to our techniques in the contemporary time, how are we photographing sometimes is how he was thinking, how these were going to be portrayed in these magazines to ensure that what you were photographing was portrayed in what you wanted the people to see.
Now, Doug, you've got a show of prints right over here, beautiful prints, but you shot all of those on a digital camera, and which has great dynamic range. Now, there's a technical term for you, but what it means is it's got great range of keeping detail in the highlights, and keeping detail in the shadows, and you get all these nice gray tones and all that. Parks, of course, was shooting on, well, Kodak Tri-X film came out in 1954, right? And that got up to ASA 400. Now, some of you are going to go, doesn't he mean ISO? And say, no, I do not mean ISO. I mean ASA. That was what it was at the time. 400. And with push processing, you could get it up to 1600 in certain developers. And it always was a battle. It almost always looked bad. So you can see Parks in some of his photos making darn sure that he's got the highlights in the right place, because he's never going to get anything back in the shadows. It's just going to be dark. It's going to be black, and any attempt to lighten up the shadows is just going to make a dull gray area. So we're lucky today, aren't we, Doug?
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely the cameras, the dynamic range, but also, again, the manipulation within the technology. It does a lot of the work for you. You had to actually think about this post or pre your shot, what you were going to do, how you wanted to make that image, because again, once you get to the printing, it's completely different than what we can do in a few seconds.
Yeah.
Doug, do you mean to say, like in Photoshop, you can do some of these things that Jim was demonstrating by hand?
Yeah, I think in Photoshop, from the artistic perspective, you can dodge and burn within the Photoshops. But again, on the photojournalistic side, we tone in Lightroom or Camera Raw.
Now,
what's interesting here is that how, if you look at Photoshop, all the terms that you use in Photoshop actually directly are taken from the darkroom practice. So there is a dodge tool, there is a burn tool.
And if you look, I was just going to mention that if you look in Photoshop at the little icons for the tools, the tool for dodging, meaning lighten, looks like that. And the tool for darkening looks like that.
That is
It's a
interesting.
cultural legacy of the darkroom era. So
shall we look at
shall we
some
go
other
on down here?
photographs?
Yeah, come on, let's go down here. I want to point out, I mentioned about printing and printing styles. And the thing about printing in a darkroom, doing all those things I was just talking about, you never got two prints right, the same. They were always, it was always difficult, and you always had trouble getting the things the same. But I also mentioned, so here is this lovely picture of the little boy sleeping with his mother. And there are a couple of things to mention about this. One, here is the same picture as it was printed for Life and published in Life magazine. So look here, see how much detail there is in the blanket here? Now look how dark it is there. This works very well in a gallery setting. It would not print well on the pages of a magazine in 1960. So they usually would be printing pictures lighter and with more tonality and more grays in the era, because they just didn't look right when you printed them in the magazine. So you would always have this, and the photographers would always be complaining that they weren't getting rich enough tones. But the printers would always be saying, we got to keep it to where we can actually print this in a half-tone magazine.
Well, I can share that one of the memos that Gordon Parks wrote to the his liaison at the photo lab printing these works, he had a note that said, I want emphasis on tone rather than content.
On content.
Yeah. And
okay.
I think that's what he meant, that that the contrast of light and shadow is
looking
more important.
What he was saying there, I think is what he was saying was, if you have to lose some detail in the background there to make it more dramatic, you go ahead.
Exactly.
That's what he's after. Now,
And
there's one
we
other
see
aspect.
We see this in the photographs.
Of this photograph right here, okay? What you'll notice is, if you can be in here and look at this print, what you'll notice here is that little catch light in his eye is the lightest part of the picture. Now, the only way I believe that can happen is the printer prints this whole picture, prints it all down to everything is, the brightest area is maybe like a 10% down gray from the, you know. And then he goes back in, and with a chemical called potassium ferrocyanide, this is what you could do, is you could lighten up areas in a picture after the print was developed and in the fixer. And you could take the potassium ferrocyanide, put it on an area of the print, put it back in the fixer, and voila, it would lighten up a little bit. You could do it too much and it would stain, and then you go do it again. But what he could do right here, is I swear, is he would come in here and with a little tiny spotting brush, take a little bit of ferrocyanide and hit the highlight in that kid's eye, and that makes that print really, really sing. It's the kind of thing that somebody who's done a lot of black and white printing will particularly notice and think of as, aha, there's the craft of doing that.
Yep.
Let's go down. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to mention for those of you who might come visit the exhibition after, you know, seeing Jim talk about this, there is a photograph of Muhammad Ali with a little girl. And I believe that he did that
Sure.
there because that's how your eye gets drawn to the
That's
little
right.
girl is he
Let's go over there.
highlighted.
Can we do that?
Could be.
Okay, we're going to slip right back behind you there. And let's see, I think,
there.
which, this one here, can you see us back here? Okay, right. So he's lightening up, particularly, there's an area over here, I think on her eye over there, particularly that catch light in that left eye is a little bit lighter.
Yes.
The reason I'm noticing it is because the catch light in that eye is brighter than the catch light in that eye.
Correct.
And so somebody has done that, but it really makes it sing.
It makes it sing, and your
Yeah.
eyes get drawn immediately to the face of the little girl.
That's right.
Yeah.
Now he had these other Muhammad Ali pictures, particularly that one. And that one is probably of this whole show is the supreme example of a dark picture with white highlights. And it really draws your eye goes straight to those eyes, the eyes, the sweat, the sparkling of the sweat on the muscles, all of that, you know, is just magnificent. But it's psychologically, that's exactly what's going on.
And
Yeah, please.
I understand, like, since the time I started printing in the darkroom, I've always had multi-grade papers to work with, whereby you could change filters and you could change the contrast on the paper. What was the situation back then? Is it the time when multi-grade papers were available, or this is all just graded papers? Because I understand that different grade of paper can also change contrast.
Contrast. You're talking about the contrast of the paper. Yes. It's a technological thing, of course, and you've done enough printing to know you're going to adapt the paper that you choose to the negative, and specifically grades of paper. So if you have a very contrasty negative, you're going to use like number 1 paper. If you have a very thin negative, underexposed, and in the era when you were shooting on Tri-X at ASA 400, you had plenty of thin negatives that were underexposed. Yeah. So you were using a lot of number 4 paper, but and that's what this is probably printed on. It's contrasty, you know, it is very, very contrasty, very strong, but he's aided by the fact that the highlights are in the right place to begin with, and he's not having to try and salvage them in the background.
well, this photograph of Muhammad Ali is one of my favorites in this group. And I think that it really shows how Gordon Parks studied lighting and really considered how to light, you know, a figure with dark skin the right way to bring out the beauty of that skin tone. And I think that this is an example of a masterful treatment of that, you know, and something that he really carefully considered. I want to ask actually our Luke and Doug, who do digital photography, is this something that you have to grapple with? Like, you know, if your negative is, what is it, underexposed, like you have to consider what paper you use?
I guess from the printing perspective, I use mostly Photoluster paper. But I think currently, I guess in today's time, one of the things for me is important not to overexpose the melanin skin, to actually show the natural tones, because it's important not to, kind of the big controversy for us now is overexposing those with darker skin to make them look lighter, or colonialize the image of a person that is a darker skin tone. So
I can't even imagine that that's a consideration.
yes, it is. It is a consideration. So for me, I use mostly just Photoluster paper and matte papers. So for me, I try to keep them as much as close to how I shot them as possible. But if I do need to tone and adjust, I can do that, post my photograph.
So I think as far as like papers, I've noticed a big difference in the type of papers you're using to print. I've been experimenting with some like really thick matte papers, and it reproduces totally different. So I have to adjust a lot of my sort of printing on the computer and understanding how that's going to come out in the final print. And there is definitely adjustment to be made. I have one quick question if I can ask.
Yeah.
You opened up talking about flash, and I know you might get to that, but I'm wondering, in conjunction with the darkroom techniques and all of these things, how much of this is also using a little bit of like flash to create some of these effects right there on the film, or is it all just
when
mostly
he
in
was
the-
shooting?
Right, correct.
Yeah,
As opposed to kind of recreating that all in the darkroom, or is there a good balance? Or
He obviously could do both and do both well. Shree, would you do me a favor? Grab that piece of paper over there, and I'll just show something. He could do it. He could do it well. So two aspects. Doug, what you were talking about in the era, what I would always do is, if I could, is while my film was rated at 400, I would set my camera meter at 250, and you just automatically built in some overexposure. And it was so much easier printing pictures of people with darker skins, Yes, it was always a problem, because you were always, when you were shooting in dark areas and you were pushing the film to higher ASAs, your shadows dropped out, and that made people look bad. So you could do that. The other way you could do it and really make things look good, that Parks was really good at, was you just light a scene, And here is a scene. I'll try and hold it steady for you there. Here is a scene of the woman that we know from her portrait holding the mop in front of the American flag, right? Yeah. And here is another scene of her. And what he has done here, this is one of his flash shots. And there is a flash down here on the floor that he's got lighting her up over this way. And then he's got somewhere back up here another flash that's filling in the shadows. Now, that other flash is toned down a little bit and is just filling in shadows so that the darkroom work doesn't get to be so complicated. Yes, exactly. That's exactly what's going on. And not all the photographers of the era could pull that off. Yeah, that was it. But he was working with a bunch of people at Life magazine, like Felipe Hulsman and a number of other photographers, and they were all having to do these kind of things, and they were all pretty good. So you can imagine them, coming into the staff room, someday and say, "Oh, I've got this great problem, and what am I going to do about it?" And everybody put their heads together and figure out, some solutions that might work, or some trick that somebody had used. Yeah. Let's go down here, because there's a couple of more pictures right here that I think are very, very instructive. Now.
Well, I'll just add that there's a photograph of Gordon Parks coming out of the YMCA in New York, and he's going to work, and he's got so many bags with him. And so he's like, you can tell like
Does he
he'll
have a
have
cart?
several
Is he
flash.
carrying them all? Has he got a
No,
cart?
carrying them all.
Ah, okay.
And there's an anecdote by a fellow photographer, and I can't remember his name. And he said that you'd be shooting a graduation ceremony, and there's Gordon Parks with
Yeah.
5 different flash bulbs and like positioning them all over the place just to get the perfect lighting.
Now, I wanted to talk about this. This is a beautiful print of this image, and I found another version of it online. And what I want to get at here is essentially it's the same thing, except this one is contrastier, and it's not nearly as pretty a tones as that one. So they've done a better job of that. But I want you to notice something else very particular. It is the finely constructed cropping of this image, the way we see it here, versus the way we see it there. What I want to point out is, you see this woman here and this woman here, both are cropped in almost exactly the same amount on both edges. This one isn't. She's cropped out a little bit more. This one, she's got her whole head in the picture. It's a very fine thing. And you'll also notice here that, see this little strip of gray and this little strip of gray like this, they are very even in this picture. It's a symmetrical picture. It has to be perfectly symmetrical for all those things to work. In this one, there's more space over here. In this one, they've evened that up. They've made that exactly right. They've just done everything to make that sing. And the effect of that is, to me, is that you no longer pay attention to the vagaries of the photograph. You're paying attention to what Parks wanted you to see.
That's brilliant explanation. And I can say that, again, in the Gordon Parks papers in Wichita State University's library, there is a letter that Gordon Parks wrote to his liaison, Ralph Baum, at Modern Age Photographic Services. And he said, I want you to print the photographs. And he's talking about the photographs here that is in the K-State gift. I want you to print them exactly as I have indicated the cropping exactly. And he said that. So he is, like you said, really paying attention to composition and creating that perfect form.
For instance, if he cropped it square, he wanted it square. He didn't want the printer filling up an 8x10 piece of paper.
Exactly. Yes.
No,
Yes.
none of that stuff, right, guys? Okay. Now, this
Okay.
picture is another, I think, is just a perfect example of another thing. This picture works because you have this sea of faces, this sea of humanity, right? And I think one of the most important things about this is that no face should stand out. They should all be almost all the same value, whatever their actual lightness or darkness, So when I'm looking at this and I'm looking at the printer, I can go, I think he dodged, remember our little tool back over there? I think he dodged that face and he dodged that face, okay? And he didn't get to that one much, the printer I'm talking about. But he then also came back in, and remember the burning in, my little hand. So if this coat had stayed really bright, it would be a bright area in the picture, and your eye would go there just as it did to the white robe in the baptism picture. And you don't want that. So in this case, what you want is to go in there and burn in that area and burn in that area and burn in that guy a little bit, make sure he doesn't go too light, However, there are some little areas, there are some clues about what's going on here, because there are some areas in here that were too tiny to burn in. So you see that little white area there, and see the white brim of that hat. There was just a couple of other little areas there that got a little light, not enough to really ruin the effect. But if this area had stayed really light, that would have been a big problem. Don't you think, Doug, when you're doing that kind of thing?
I agree. Back again to the relevance of showing, for me, the protest or the people, everybody's out there. He's wanting everybody's faces to be shown versus the Muslim picture, you have the shallow depth of field, the fall off. So again, it's to me, it kind of goes hand in hand, but the relevance of what he's trying to show and depict in that photograph.
And to me, go ahead, Doug. I'm sorry, Luke.
Well, I think as you're explaining this, I'm kind of trying to relate back to, how we're processing digital images today. And it's in processing those files, it's all global adjustments. I'll push up these shadows or these highlights, but that's to the entire image. And it's really interesting to talk about how much little minute local adjustments are being made all over the place to really craft this into something that has that power and impact.
And it's not just a technique of just saying, well, no values should be above this and below that. What you have to have is his sensibilities about what's trying to be said. And I know what I want in a picture like this is I want the viewers to see the people. I don't want them to see how clever I am as a photographer. I want that kind of transparency of effect. I want them to go straight there to the imagery. Shri, you were going to say?
Yeah, one of the things that I observed, because when I took pictures like these, when I took pictures of crowds or multitudes of people for newspapers, there used to be one of the sort of advices as to how to crop. So what I see repeated here in a way is that you never see the last row of people.
Yeah.
And there's a reason.
If there had been empty space up here,
you will not see it. And so I think what in many of these images, there is a active, subjective, interpretive role that the photographer is playing, even when they are reporting truthfully.
The picking of the angle and everything.
Because that consolidates.
Very good
I think
point.
one of the things that I really like about photography is that photography is a reductive art. We always end up showing less than what we witness because it's always cropping the reality into a box. And that starts, that cropping itself is the beginning of subjective interpretation of how you want to tell a story. And I think a picture like this is very much
it's what of the world you choose to include and what you choose to exclude. And we don't know what's right outside that frame.
Those are really great points. Thank you, Shri. Okay, we could talk about this forever.
Sure.
But we probably have time for one more photograph and then we have to wrap up.
Well, let's go around here. By the way, I'll say, we talked about lightning and darkening. Look at this guy. Look how much lighter he is in the center there than this whole wall is. That is a matter of printing. That's not the way the scene looked. This is a matter of making sure that he wanted to make sure that that guy showed up and that this white wall didn't overpower that guy. So that's a matter of printing. And probably what they did under the enlarger, he did a fist burn. You would just give you a whole thing on one exposure, take your fist underneath for another exposure, and go like this, and all of a sudden this area around the outside is darker.
So that's burning, is that right?
That's burning in. Yeah, that's
burning in. Okay,
yeah.
Got it.
Let's come down here. There's some color images here that are interesting, but I think we want to get down here to some of the stuff from Kansas. By the way, this one right there, that is one of Parks's, one of those images that he did when he was really trying sort of to be artistic. And that is two slides sandwiched together. Two pictures, one slide put on top of the other slide, and then a negative made from that he could make that print from. Let's go on down here.
Yeah, there are several examples in this show of that where he's layering slides or negatives.
And particularly, I want to get down here to some of these Kansas photographs that he did. The first one, this picture right here of the woman lying in her bed, the family sitting around. And what I want you to notice about how he did this was he gained a sense of, to me, he gained a sense of light in the picture by including this dark area over here. If you have that dark area framing up the lighter area behind it, you get a greater sense of glow and light. Then, of course, you have to make sure when you're printing the picture that that person doesn't disappear in the dark shadows. Because if that person isn't there and their hands, and I can notice that that area there is a little bit flatter than some of this area over here. So that tells me somebody was in there lightening it up just a little bit. And that made all the difference.
So
But-
burning that area.
Hmm?
The term is burning that area. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So, but let's get now to the master craftsman. His second book, Gordon Park's second book, was on portraits.
Yes.
And so when you see him doing this picture of this lady, it's because he'd done hundreds of these things before. And he was really, really good at it, wasn't he? Yeah. So this is shot, I'm absolutely sure it's shot on a 4x5 camera. This isn't just some 35mm snapshot, 4x5 camera, and it's lit. And it's lit very nicely. It's lit in the way that that book showed about using multiple flash bulbs. So there's a flash outside up and to the left up here, coming in and lighting their face, giving that rim light around there. There's a light over on this side to make sure that these shadows over here don't go too dark. And he's made sure that there's some light on the background back there without, however, being too bright. But the overall effect is effortless, right?
But you know,
And-
this was shot during the day. So is he using sunlight?
Is he using what?
Is he using sunlight as well? Or you're saying that even during the day, he will have the flash so that he's controlling it
I think
exactly
he's
the way he
controlling it.
wants?
I mean, it's possible he had a shaft of sunlight coming through there, but we've seen him do so many 4x5 portraits with flash bulbs so much time that I think the obvious answer is that looks like one of those Gordon Park's masterpiece portraits, you know, and I don't see any reason to look for another reason except he was just doing it very, very well. And of course, shooting on 4x5 film, so you got that really nice quality and it really
Right.
pops out. Shree?
Yeah, one of the things that because a lot of our viewers may not have had the experience of shooting film itself, on top of that film with flash, I think the level of difficulty in a picture like this, if this was taken on 4x5, is so many layers of difficulties or challenges. First of all, when you're shooting film, you don't get immediate preview of what you just exposed, right? You have to go to the darkroom, develop the film, and then you see whether you succeeded or not. So that's one where you need to be in tune with your process so much that you have a confidence without having to see the preview of your image. Secondly, when you shoot 4x5, the picture that you see here is actually, when you're focusing it, appears upside down and mirrored on the ground glass. So when you're composing, you're looking at the world upside down and mirrored, and your composing does, right? So that's second level of translation of how you see the ground glass and how it relates to reality. And thirdly, when you're shooting with strobe lights or flash of any kind, even your eyes don't perceive how the light finally will look on your subject, because the flash flickers in a microsecond, in such a fraction of a second, that you don't have even visual clue as to how it's going to look. For somebody to pull all of these together in a photograph like this, I think it's really difficult to kind of explain how in tune one must be with the equipment, with the materials, with the chemistry to get something like this pulled on location, that too.
And there were even a couple of more things about that. If we were shooting a digital camera, we would see immediately after we shot it, even with our little flashes, you know, we would see it. Yeah, it wouldn't be upside down backwards when we were composing it. We would see it. And if this over here was too bright, we'd go over and we would dial down this flash. But you can't do that with a flash bulb. You have a number 5 flash bulb or a number 25 flash bulb, and they are as bright as they are XY, you know.
Hey,
So
Shri,
what you can do, the only thing you can do is you can move the flash further away to make it dimmer. So if he thought that this was getting too light, you know, he could move this flash that's filling in the side of her face there. He could move it further back to make it darker, but he can't see it happening in real time. He can't see it.
So in this case, he would try different positions. And
You
just
could
keep taking
do that.
pictures, is
However,
right?
Yeah, okay, now remember, I think he's got three lights on this.
Mhm.
You shoot a picture, I mean, you put your 4x5 film holder into the camera, you pull the dark slide, you hope she hasn't moved a little bit. You hope you focus with her sitting like this, and if she went over like this, she's out of focus. So you hope she didn't move, okay? You put your 3 flash bulbs in there, you have wires going to them with batteries. You shoot your picture, and then if you want to do another one, you change the slide, the film holder, you flip it over, you put it back in, you go around to all 3 flashes, you change the flash bulbs, you come over, you do one more picture. You want to do another one, you go through the whole thing again. Probably, if you're going to do this, what you might do is you might have an assistant there or a couple of assistants armed with flash bulbs, changing out flash. And then you've got a pile of flash bulbs over here, and they're too hot, and some kid is going to grab one and burn his hand, I mean, it's just, all those things were part of the era, so it was just amazing.
Can somebody explain to me, who's not knowledgeable about photography, the significance of a 4x5 camera?
So in short, it's resolution. So there are many advantages, of course, of 4x5. For different photographers, they're different. In terms of architecture photographers, we'll talk about control of perspective. But for everybody, what pays off is the amount of information you can capture. So for a 35mm film for now, can easily make a print twice the size of this print that you have, okay? 4x5, if you scan a negative, it will give you data that's almost equivalent of about 300 megapixels. And so that is the amount of information you have in a simple 4x5 with skilled professionals developing it in a certain way, rating the ISO in a certain way. You can even push that even further. So one of the great advantages of large negative is that you capture a lot more information, which allows you to make a lot sharper or a lot larger print.
But it's big and it's on a tripod and it's cumbersome.
So yeah, I'm gonna ask our contemporary photojournalist here, is a camera like that something that is used?
I don't have one. I've made pictures on an old twin lens Flex, which is cool because then you can focus after you already have the film in place, and you can still see through that second lens. But yeah, I mean, for the work I do, I don't use that. I would like to have even a medium format. I just think, in addition to having more information in the file or negative, I think it renders space a little differently than a smaller format, which can be applicable to things like portraits or stronger subject matter or something like that. So I think it's a choice you have to make creatively.
Doug, did you ever do 4x5?
I did not. Stick with my Leicas and stick to 35. No 4x5s for me. I do have a Hasselblad for 120.
You have a
120mm.
Hasselblad?
I do, but
Digital?
No, film.
Film,
120,
okay.
Yeah. But again, I can get instant gratification from a Leica right here and make adjustments right here. You look at Miss Jefferson and Mr. James. Yeah, Uncle James, and
Uncle James.
you see the shadows, you see the strobe, and again, he had to do this all over again and recreate it versus us. We can just make a quick adjustment.
Jim,
one of the
can you
things-
show everyone the negative
Yeah.
of a 4x5.
Eileen, these are 4x5 negatives that Shree brought along, So yeah, you've got a lot of film, a lot of data. The thing today is it's probably quite possible that Doug's Leica, digital Leica there, can produce a print indistinguishable from a 4x5. At least up to a certain size. All these pictures over here in the next gallery were shot on 35mm, weren't they? Yes.
So we're talking
Great
about Doug's
tonality,
photographs.
very sharp. Yes. All that kind of stuff. We're spoiled. Absolutely.
All right. Well, we are a little bit over the hour already.
right.
So Jim, I will give you the last word.
Oh, well, I'm talking to my lavalier here, Eileen. Thank you. So listen, I just want to thank Shree, Doug, Luke, for your perspectives, for being here, for bringing that into the conversation. But I want to thank particularly Eileen and the Beach Museum for having this, making it possible to have this kind of discussion, you know, and hopefully to bring into play another aspect of Gordon Parks. I think Gordon Parks, for all of us, particularly because he was a Kansan, was a particular inspiration. It was to my generation, and obviously has been to their generation, that he showed the way, and he showed what was possible, and he showed what photography could do. And nobody is going to doubt that Gordon Parks' photography belongs in the gallery walls. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. And I have learned a lot in this program, and it's really increased my appreciation for Gordon Parks and his technical prowess in photography. And I'll remind everyone that he was a self-taught photographer. And you know, that beautiful Mrs. Jefferson portrait that Jim was talking about, the technical virtuosity of that photograph, that was done in 1950. So this is early in his career, and he's already achieved this kind of technical excellence. The more I learn about Gordon Parks, the more I appreciate just, you know, how brilliant he is. So thank you everyone for tuning in, and we will see you next time in our next program. Bye.
Bye.